Okay, hi everybody. Great to be here talking to you about this really important topic. I'm really sorry that we had to pre-record this part of it because I couldn't be here for the live showing of this. But I'm really looking forward to it and really hope you get some useful tips from the session.
Great. Well, I'm really excited to be here too. I think this is an amazing opportunity for us to dig deep into a topic that I don't think gets a lot of attention. And why don't we just dive right in? What's your point of view around the importance of those relationships to securing and retaining customers?
Well, I think your customers are your lifeblood, and your relationships with those customers being healthy is part of that lifeblood. So if you don't have the healthy relationships, you're always gonna struggle. And if you don't have the relationships, you don't have people to speak to who can sort of coach and mentor you within an account, then your ability to influence what's going to happen is completely diminished. And you might end up being in a position where you're having to second guess what your own customer is doing or thinking. So, but I mean that's the blatantly obvious thing to say, right? But it's kind of but it happens. I think you get so much kudos around new business, chasing the new shiny target over there, that once you've won an account and you're managing it, and it becomes more of a day-to-day thing. There's this sense that you kind of slip into it's just part of business as usual. Whereas in fact, if you slip into that kind of mode, you might not be as proactive as you could be with the customer, and you might forget to do things like chatting to them regularly, talking about the successes you're having together, finding out what's going on in the account, all those sorts of good things that help build that understanding and that healthy relationship and make sure you understand what's going on with the customer. The risk if you don't do that is that somebody else is looking at your customer as a big shiny account, and they're putting a lot of focus and effort on it, and they're building relationships kind of behind your back. And before you know it, they'll know more about your customer than you, and they'll go to market, and you lose out on the opportunity.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there are a lot of dreams for sale, and our competitors are constantly out there pitching them. And I think the challenge, like you say, is that we move into that operational, that day to day, we're very focused on delivering and executing what the client bought. We forget that they're going to be looking to renew at some point down the track. And that means building those relationships with people that you might not deal with on a day-to-day basis, people that are outside your day-to-day network, the people that sign the contracts, the people that have the budgets that maybe you don't deal with on a day-to-day basis. So for me, totally agree with all of that. And I think key to that is just having a really clear understanding of who's who, what the decision-making process looks like, who is important. And these might not be people you deal with every day. They might be people you check in with every quarter or even half a year or once a year, drop an odd email to. The depth and quality of the relationship will depend on where they fit into the whole process. But yeah, it's important that we don't ignore that. And I think also your executive team can have a role to play in helping you there too. It's not like you have to do all the heavy lifting on your own.
Definitely. What is that executive sort of sponsorship, and when do those interaction points happen? Not just when there's a sort of contract review every quarter or every 6 months or every year. Kind of what are the interventions in between? And at those sessions, it's kind of sharing and showing, isn't it? Sharing new ideas and thoughts that are going on. If I was the account manager, with other accounts that I've got, or with other colleagues' accounts who are very similar, sharing those ideas. And also showing the successes, reminding them constantly that you're delivering value to them.
Yeah, so important. I love that idea that it's not just wheeling them out when the time comes. This is because it's so obvious. Everybody knows if you bring in the GM a couple of weeks before the contract is due, they know what they're there for. It's so inauthentic. It's so transparent. So you're right. Like to bring, it's about that longer term relationship and, bringing them in strategically when you need to over time.
Yeah, actually, Warwick, that reminds me, I've got a good example of where the situation could happen for organizations. So I was working with a pension scheme company, and they were looking after their client had two big schemes, and they looked after my client looked after one, and one of their competitors looked after the other. I was engaged a couple of weeks before the tender arrived because it was this big renewal, and the account was a threat, and could we do a bit of prep and planning? Not be reactive and wait till the tender landed. But in the first meeting, it really transpired very quickly that the person looking after the account from my customer had been outflanked and outmaneuvered by their equivalent at their competitor, who'd been influencing the customer to consolidate these two pension schemes into one, and highlighted the benefits of doing that, and therefore also the benefits of them taking over the scheme. So by the time I got engaged, the client was massively behind the curve and had missed out on the relationship side of things, which led to not being able to influence the customer properly, which of course in the end led to them losing that account. So it's an extremely serious thing to get wrong if you're not careful.
I mean, it's so true. I mean, there's a lot of things that probably could have been done better in that whole example, like in getting you involved much earlier. But besides that, what we've got to remember is lots of conversations happen behind our backs and in the four walls and the corridors of our client's business. The more people we know, the more opportunities we have to learn about those and to influence those, and find out what's actually going on, rather than, getting the one-sided view from our key contact who maybe is not full disclosure, and I think, again, demonstrates why relationships are so important. Awesome. I think we're ready for question number 2.
Thanks very much, guys. That was absolutely brilliant. So on to question number 2, this one around the ominous pricing. Loads of people asking about this. When there's pressure from competition maybe to adjust the pricing or to look at it again, and also how to manage client expectations. Warwick, can you kick us off on that one as to how you would address that?
What I found really helps for me is to be prepared for that conversation. Clients often think renewals and loyalty equals a discount, and often it doesn't. Sometimes you have to increase your prices, or at the very least, keep them the same. So know that your client's going to expect that. Have the answers, have the negotiation strategy in mind before you have your presentation or before you submit your proposal. And if you do find yourself having to discount for whatever reason, competitive forces, or just to secure a big customer who's trying to squeeze you, always make sure that there is some other concession. So if you offer a discount, then maybe you can get a 3-year contract instead of a 1-year contract. Or maybe you can increase the price on a different service, maybe one they don't use so much. Or you can get guarantees around volume commitments, or you can move to an exclusive supplier, or at least a preferred supplier. So there's different things that you can trade off. I would just make sure that you never give a discount just because it got asked for and you're worried about losing a big account. There should be mutual value in that negotiation. I think that's really important.
100% agree with all of those things. And I think building on the last point about the relationship, if you can have those frank conversations with the client on how their business is going, because quite often we hear that the procurement department are putting a sort of blanket, we've got to reduce costs, the current costs by 5% over the next 12 months or whatever. So if you're in a renewal in that period, you need to know that information. So at least you can think about in advance how to position your pricing. What could you do to sharpen up the pricing? So understanding the budget is so obvious, isn't it? But having the confidence to ask the question, having that serious question with the client is important. And then I think your point around the expectations is really it's really important to be able to explain that clearly if we get into a sort of pitch and proposal stage, certainly. And I think I've used this a number of times, something I'd call a price bridge, which is a way to visually explain why a price has changed from what a customer is paying today to what you're proposing, whether it's up or down. So imagine just a line going, here's the price today, you adjusted the spec slightly, and now there's 3 every month instead of 4, so the price is going to go down. But then you've changed the scope a bit here, and it just plots this change to get them to where the price is today. So it's a clear, and you can be creative a little bit with that as well, of course, but it's a clear path just to justify why there's a change in your price. That can be a really, really good thing to do in a proposal or a pitch.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's something we overlook. We kind of defend our pricing, but we don't go in there with confident knowing that we've got logic behind how the calculation came to be. I remember in my old company, we spent something like 300 million. It was Expedia. We spent 300 million on technology investment to have a best-in-class online booking tool, reporting, data integration, big data, APIs, connectivity, the security, all that stuff. That doesn't come for free, and that has to be built in and captured through the pricing. So, you know, I think customers don't necessarily have line of sight or visibility to all of the things that you're reinvesting in your business that they enjoy the benefits of, but there's a price attached. And I think you're absolutely right that we have to be better at making that clear that this isn't just a random, we want more money grab. This is actually so we can sustainably continue to deliver and enhance our solution for you. Great
so
point.
you were talking there, guys, about pricing, and obviously that being a critical issue. And you sort of start to blur the lines a little bit to talk about value and the value that you can create within an organization. Can you think a little bit more about that, about how you might create value and why that's so important?
Sure. Shall I?
Yeah, kick it off.
Dive in. Yeah, thanks. No, I was thinking that as we were talking through pricing, it's so closely linked to value, Kat. You're absolutely right. And I think back to a little bit of research we did maybe 18 months, 2 years ago on value, because we were looking at we were trying to find models that showed how people calculate and create value. And there's not an awful lot out there, really. I read with our colleague John Williams, we read a number of the sort of leading sales and business development books looking for the answer to this question. We couldn't really find it. So we put together a little bit of a model about value. And, you know, it's basically thinking about two different levels of value, really. You've got, within the account that you're managing, you've got shareholder value. So the people who own and run the business right at the top, and they're probably looking for something that will reduce the costs, increase their cash flow or improve their cash flow position, or drive revenue for them. So sales, cash flow, or reducing costs. So if you're working with an account and you're trying to think, what are we doing that's bringing value to that account? Think of it through that lens to start with. What are we doing that is helping them achieve one of those three goals? That's the first level of value. The second level is thinking about the stakeholders in your account. So the people that your service or product is being done to or used by. Who are those kind of stakeholders? If you were a printing company, it would be, you know, facilities management and the staff of the company using your printers, for example. So what are they looking for? What makes their lives better? What makes what you do help them do their jobs better? It might not be linked to driving revenue, reducing cost. It will be to do with user experience, efficiency, and those sorts of things. So think of it through that stakeholder lens as well. And if you do that, I bet you will start to build up a bit of a picture of what the things you're doing in the account, what things you're doing to drive value within that account. And once you know that, you can start talking and communicating in value terms, and maybe even sharing in something that I'd call a value report, which has become sort of quite popular with our customers. It's kind of like an SLA or KPI sort of report, but done as a proposal almost. So there's a little bit of a story to it. There's a bit of sort of sharing some of the successes, and there's a bit on more about the value. So not how many calls have we answered, how quickly did we pick up the phone. It's got that in it as well, but it's also got, by doing some of those things, we think we've helped you improve these areas, which are ticking the value buttons, if you like.
Yeah, that's I was on a call last week, and somebody called the quarterly business review, which is what most of us call it, a quarterly value review. And I was like, I love that idea of just that simple change of word, but now it brings into the things that you're talking about, not just stats, not just we answer the phone in 20 seconds and 99.9% uptime, but to bring in what is the result of that, the benefit of that, the you know, what have we helped your business achieve or, you know, improve because of that. And I think for me, value definitely has a few qualities. One, it's got to be useful. One, it has to be relevant. It has to be ideally differentiated, and it also has to be recognized. It's a bit like that you know, if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? You know, it's the same with value. If your client doesn't, you might think it's so valuable, but if your client doesn't see it, meaning you're delivering something they don't care about, or B, you're not telling them that you're doing it, then it's not valuable at all. And obviously you've got those bottom line, you know, cost reduction, cost avoidance, but like you say, other things that improve user experience, they can help you drive efficiencies or make things faster or simpler, easier. And all those things you can bring together through an account plan and just conversations with your client about what they're working on and sharing the good news about the things that you do along the way.
On now to a tricky topic, I guess. How do we manage the competition? Warwick, can you kick us off on this one?
Yeah, I mean, you've always got to keep one eye on the competition. You obviously don't want to run the race based on, what the competition does, but you need to be aware of what's happening in the market. So here's some things that I think are useful. Do your own research. Look at what your competitors are doing, read their annual reports, go to their company website, look at their YouTube channels, read the interviews with their leaders that are out in the press. That can help you understand what's their mission statement. Download their white papers, get a sense of what they're doing and how they're positioning themselves. Do your own SWOT for your own organization. We get fed marketing collateral from our marketing teams. What's our value proposition? What's our USP? Here's our standard template. Here's our deck. And we forget to form our own opinions. We're kind of just regurgitating what we've been told, and we don't say it with conviction because we don't really believe it, don't even sometimes understand it. So invest some time, do your own SWOT, figure out what's going on with your own organization as well, and then create your own point of view. That's my advice.
Yeah, cool. I agree with all of those things, Warwick. And actually, I'd kind of add one angle onto that. And I guess by SWOT, we're talking strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, aren't we? The kind of classic model for looking at this sort of stuff is I would just do it through a slightly different lens as well. Do what you said, and then put yourself in the shoes of the customer, and imagine if you were the customer looking at my company and maybe one or two of the key competitors. Maybe just what are the strengths and weaknesses that you think your customer sees in you and your competition. And if you do that bit, you'll find great stuff in your strengths that counter some of their weaknesses, and your messaging will start to appear from doing that bit of an analysis as well. So I do what you said, and then maybe add that on top, and you'll have a great competitive sort of differentiation approach and strategy there.
Yeah, agreed. Take that sort of outside in kind of lens for sure. Good idea.
And while we're focusing on sort of that slightly internal lens, what about, which you quite often get because people like the sort of sexy new business, what about when you get kickback for renewal about, we don't have the time, we don't have the resources for all these great things you're talking about? How could we address that?
Well, I mean, for me, it's absolutely about taking control. So you've got data in your CRM. You should know when your clients are up for renewal. You should know what type of contracts they're on. You've got to start planning this out so much earlier. So run those reports, understand I usually run about 15 months out because I think, okay, that gives me the next 12 plus a bit of a head start. When are their clients, when are they dropping, all of the expiries? Are they auto renewals or are they fixed term contracts? And when physically are they what date are they dropping? Because sometimes when I do that, I'm like, oh my God, that August is crazy. How can I even think of taking leave in August? But I've got 6 clients renewing. I'm going to have to be much more prepared. And also when you want to bring other people in and not just do it alone, solo, you've got to be mindful of other people's time, commitments, resources. The further out you plan and start to prepare for this, the easier it's going to be to manage, or A, get resources, B, manage them.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of some obvious things there, but there's a tendency to stick their head in the sand, isn't there? If you're the account manager running the day to day. And I had a great example just a couple of weeks ago talking to an account manager, and they were explaining to me how they had 300 accounts. I mean, how can you manage 300 accounts in the first place to start with? But we were talking about the bidding process, and she was saying how she received an email from one of her 300 clients with a tender attached to it. She wasn't even sure what it was. So kind of shame on her company for not giving her any training on what sort of stuff, what a tender is and what you need to do. But then secondly, not having the triggers and the processes in place to at least flag to her one of your clients is coming up to renewal in whatever the right period of time is in advance. So you can think about getting that renewal or retaining that client rather than, blimey, what's this? It's a tender for the business that we've won. So yeah. Okay.
You just reminded me about a point because one of the reasons we wanted to do this is because account managers aren't regularly out there pounding the pavement, hustling, doing RFPs, doing bids. We're usually fortunate enough that our clients renew. They may have auto rollovers. They may have long-term contracts. I was in account management for 5 years before I had to do my first RFP. I managed to avoid them all because I just happened to have clients that rolled over. And So be honest with your skill gaps. If you know you don't know how to write an RFP, start to learn. Let your boss know, listen, this is coming up. I'm going to need help with this. If you're not good at negotiation, get that out on the table now and buddy up with somebody in sales. There's no point, pretending you don't have skill gaps, because you do, I do, we all do. And if they're going to be a challenge when it comes to renewing that customer, you want to start to address those much earlier on. So I think that's an important point too.
So Warwick, you've talked there about, maybe putting something 15 months in advance of the sort of the contract renewal date, but how are you going to remember that? Do you have a great big list of the dates where your contract ends? What's the way to do that, to capture that?
I used to just look at spreadsheets, but if you're a manager, you might have 3, 4, 5, 6, 700, 1,000 accounts within your team. If you're an account manager, like Graham was just saying, up to 300 accounts, you can't just keep that all in your head and look at some random spreadsheet. So fastest and easiest and simplest way is just to drop it all into your calendar. You can create a separate new calendar with renewals and just drop them all in there. Simple.
Perfect. Useful. Thank you. So that's fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you. It's sort of related a little bit, this one, I think. We were talking earlier about the value reports and having sort of SLAs and have you met them, have you not? What do you do in the really tricky situation where you've not met your client's standards or expectations through the contract and all of a sudden you've only really realized it now? Graham, how would you handle this sticky situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's a situation you don't want to have, right, to start with. So you try and do everything you can to avoid it, but sometimes that doesn't happen. And it's, quite a long list of skeletons that have come out of the closet with a number of accounts that I've worked on. So I think you just have to be honest. And, from the outset, as you're coming up, say you're coming up to responding to the proposal and creating a proposal in a renewal situation, you have to get all the skeletons out of the closet and work out, admit them, and then have a proper plan of how you're going to improve them or fix those challenges in the proposal. And then think about how you answer the obvious question: why didn't you fix these things beforehand? So you defend that a little bit, maybe by throwing in something really quite different and new, and that's a different way of delivering a service, which perhaps wouldn't have been appropriate to do in the middle of delivery. So I think that's the way you have to try and do it. Be honest and have a clear plan on how you're going to improve it, and some rationale as to why you haven't done it yet. Difficult one.
Yeah, sadly, you could have had 5 years of stellar service and 6 months of crappy service, and that's what they're going to remember. So that is the challenge. I agree with you. I think you have to be transparent. You've got to let your client know you're working on it. Create the plan to sort of, assemble the team and get everybody on board to kind of make things happen and improve. One thing to be wary of when you're an account manager and you've got a lot at stake and you've got your own targets about renewal and your boss is on your back about this customer and their contract, you can sometimes go in all guns blazing to your operations team, your dev team, like whoever you're dealing with, going, we need to win this and you're screwing up. And if you don't sort this out, our client's walking out the door. That doesn't do anybody any favors. That just puts people off. It can build a very combative and frictional. Is that a word? Frictional? Friction. Anyway, you know what I mean.
I like frictional work. I like it.
It is a word now.
Yeah.
A friction-based relationship, and that's not what you want. You need cooperation. So don't put unrealistic expectations. Don't set unrealistic deadlines. Try to get everybody cooperating, not you in there, with the stick. That I found typically always fails.
Thank you. That's useful and sort of slightly related, but I love the reference to skeletons in the closet. Obviously, very topical with Halloween being around. But I think what about where you've just been really complacent? So it might not be that you've had stellar service and then rubbish service to kind of echo what Warwick said. But what about where you're just being a lazy bones and you're just being a lazy bones and you're just being too complacent? How would you address that one, Graham?
Well, why are people complacent when you've got an account to manage? I think it's probably two reasons, Kat. I think you're kind of a bit scared of facing the reality that you're the customer that you got a great relationship with is going to almost cheat on you and go out to market and look somewhere else. How dare they? But unfortunately, because of procurement processes, typically they have to do that. So burying your head in the sand and kind of hoping it doesn't happen is kind of, being scared about it. That maybe makes people be a little bit complacent. Or the flip side, the other emotion is maybe just a bit too arrogant. We're doing a great job here. They would never go somewhere else. How could they? So I'm going to also stick my head in the sand and imagine this isn't going to happen. Then all of a sudden I get the shock of my life. When the client sends me an RFP and I'm on the back foot. So I think you've got to try and not slip into one of those two kind of situations where you're being complacent. I've got a stat for you actually. 47% of the time, research shows, this is in the Challenger sale research, 47% of the time the incumbent wins. So it's about half the time the incumbent wins. So I mean, that's not a great statistic, right? You're going to lose half your accounts when they come up to. I mean, that's not good. So that's evidence that maybe too many people are being a little bit too complacent out there.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. People either, you get distracted. You think, oh, they love us, or we're too embedded. The pain of change is too great. But for the right proposal, clients will leave. They'll go through the pain of change, no problem. So I think definitely for me, what I have learned and the feedback I've often got, too often probably, I should have fixed it before, many years before, is about taking shortcuts in the RFP or in any proposal. I know it's a hassle, 300 questions. You're like, can't I just cut and paste? But it's so obvious that all of the intelligence that you've gathered, all the things you know about your client that could really differentiate that proposal and bring that narrative and that story to life isn't there. It's absent. And you have the advantage because you know that stuff that the competitors don't. So don't, as difficult as it is, as time consuming as it is, it's a hassle. It's a hassle. Nobody enjoys that because you are now going to have to edit 300 questions and bring in the circumstances and the history and the what's been happening with the client. So yeah, don't take shortcuts, or at least pick the questions where it's going to really be important that you demonstrate you know the customer. And I've lost business because they said, it's like you didn't know us. And it's like, I can see how you would think that by reading this. And not everybody who's in the decision, the committee, knows you. Yeah. They don't know that, we've done great work together. So yeah, don't be so afraid to put it in there.
Excellent, thank you. And probably, a little bit similar to what we discussed earlier, but just going to loop back because this is a personal bugbear of mine. But when, a bid lands and having always been in bid teams, I'm the one everyone goes, so all of a sudden we need to rally all the troops. So where you get pushback as a salesperson or an account manager or somebody, looking after an account where the people are saying there's not resources, there's not internal support to do this. I know we talked about some tactics about how we address that, but can I just loop back to that one? Because I think it's really important, especially as, as I say, on the receiving end of it, what's the best way to get people geared up for it?
I mean, for me, obviously the earlier you plan, the faster you secure the resources. Because if you're telling somebody in January you need help in December and they say, sure, no problem, well, they've committed. If you're doing this all last minute, that's going to be tough. I think you have to be realistic, especially in account management. Sales is sexy. Sales is where the resources are. If you've got a bid management team, they've been hired to drive new business. They're not really there usually to help with renewals. So you kind of sometimes have to squeeze in between what's going on. So if you have to take the lead and create a project plan yourself, if you've got to take the lead and copy paste those questions into an Excel document so everyone can read it, if you've got to take the lead and send the reply back in the NDA and do some of that basic stuff to free people up and help people out, accept it, and just say, okay, let me see what I can do. I'll do the NDA. I will sign this off. I'll accept the bid. I will, do the kickoff call. I'll come back and now let you know where help is not non-negotiable. Like I have to have somebody help me on these. I'll take the lead on some of this other stuff. Not normally my job, but I'll do it just to make sure I get some help. That's how it's worked for me. I very rarely have had a bid management team from start to finish exclusively working on a renewal where I've just been able to do nothing. It's never worked out like that.
Yeah, it's always a team effort, and it's certainly a bugbear of bid teams not knowing when the renewals are coming up. We did a little bit of research a while ago, and across a number of heads of bid from big blue chip companies in the UK, if we said, how many of the top 10, what are your top 10 renewal deals? Could you name the top 10 renewal deals coming up in the next 12 months? And on average, they could mention one. They knew of one. That's their company's biggest account. So you can see how this doesn't work. So some of that emphasis is on the account manager, right? To shout and scream that this account that's worth £250,000 a year or more, whatever it is, it's at risk. We've got 3 months before they're going to go out to market. If we don't get it right and start influencing them now, then there's a real risk that we're going to lose that £250,000 from our revenue figure. So I'm going to need some help to make sure we don't lose that. It costs us a lot of money it would cost us a lot more money to bid for work to win that amount of revenue back again. So it's worth investing in it. And this is what I need to help me to retain that business. I need some time from them, some time from those people, and some of your time to help me influence and then respond to that request when it comes out. So it's down to the planning. It's about making some of the noise, making some noise about it earlier in the process, and making people see the risk of that client leaving.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much. So I think we've covered all of the questions in one way or another with those topics that we've discussed. But there's a lot to sort of think about here and a lot to encompass. If you could give maybe one tip each, one kind of final tip about how to approach this, how to address it, what would it be? You first, please, Graham.
Well, I would encourage people to look at the pyramid of renewal doom, which you may not have heard about. In fact, you probably haven't heard about, but it's just a simple model that we created to help people just to think about your renewal strategy. And it just takes you through the different approaches, from you do nothing and walk away from the account, through to we want to renew it proactively before it goes to market, and all those different steps in between. So to spark ideas on what you think you could do realistically to win and keep this important client of yours, I'd look at the pyramid of doom, which you can sort of see the triangle in front of you at the moment that shows the pyramid. We'll put a link out there that just links to a white paper where there's a little bit more detail on it, but use that as your basis for your thinking and your strategy for your renewals.
I love that, the renewal pyramid of doom. It's so clever, and it's true. And I love that framework that you have, because it's really clear to sort of see, well, where is my client within that? And then obviously the goal of renewal at the top, and the strategies that fall into each of those stages. So it's really helpful. For me, it's really about the planning, the project planning, because if you're a client that has one account, well, it's going to be a bit easier for you. But if you've got a lot of clients, you've got to be in control of the wheel. So I've got a captured planning template. It's an Excel template, and we'll share this with the replay and a link to download it. But it guides you through the steps of doing your SWOT, doing your competitor analysis, building your win themes. Like, what is the narrative? What's the story you wanted to tell in your proposal? Very high level. Go to strategic proposals for more detail on that, but this will just get you started. You're setting your pricing strategy, building your win team. So it's a simple template, but it will at least get you thinking about the path to success to secure that client.
Wonderful. Really useful to have some actual physical takeaways. So that's brilliant. I think if we're okay, we might go over to, we've had a few live questions coming in through the course of the presentation from you guys today. Maybe we could pick up some of those now.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you, Graham, for recording this. Appreciate it. And we'll head. Kat and I will now be in the live and answering your questions.
Thank you, guys.